Have you ever wondered what people actually feel when you're gone? Not when you slam the door, not when you raise your voice, but when you go quiet.
Disappear. Withdraw. What happens to them, not just in the moment, but in the days, weeks, and months that follow? Do they feel regret? Do they feel abandoned? Do they finally understand? Or do they simply feel the echo of the absence they once ignored? Here's a truth most won't admit. Some people don't value your presence until it becomes memory. They don't listen to your words until silence screams louder. They don't realize what you brought to the table until it's empty. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." But here's the twist. Most people won't accept you completely. Not when it threatens their comfort. Not when it reveals their selfishness. Not when it forces them to look in the mirror. You were there. You gave. You explained. And they consumed. Dismissed. Expected more. Because people often confuse your empathy for availability, your patience for weakness, your consistency for something they're entitled to. Until you leave. Until you go quiet. Until you stop showing up like clockwork and start showing up for yourself. That's when everything changes. Not because you changed, but because your absence begins to show them who they really were in your presence. Not kind, not grateful, not aware, just comfortable, just entitled, just blind. You see, walking away doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it says, "Enough." And when you do it without a dramatic exit, without rage, without explanation, it hits harder. Because silence is surgical. It cuts through the noise, through the denial, through the lies they told themselves about how you'd never leave. You weren't loud, but now your absence is. Now, every space you used to fill reminds them. That laugh at the wrong moment, that text that always came, that voice that checked in, that patience that absorbed their chaos. Gone, and in its place, echoes, not of anger, but of impact. Because when you walk away with grace, with strength, you leave behind more than emptiness. You leave behind a question. What did I lose? And the most haunting part? They don't always know. They just feel it. An ache, a silence, a presence that once softened their edges. You were their mirror, and they shattered it. Now they're left with reflection, and no way to fix it. So don't chase closure. Don't return to explain. Don't dilute your absence just to comfort their guilt. You're not the villain for walking away. You're the hero of your own escape. Because strength isn't always in staying. Sometimes it's in disappearing. Not to punish, but to preserve. And when they finally realize what they lost, let them sit with it. Let them miss you. Let them wonder. Because the echo you leave behind, it speaks volumes, even in silence, especially in silence. Have you ever asked yourself, what do they actually miss when I leave? Not who you are, but the role you played. Not your essence, but your usefulness. This is where it begins, the disillusionment. We walk through life assuming we are seen, valued, held in the hearts of others as we hold them in ours. But are we? Or are we simply placeholders? Convenient background characters in someone else's story? It's a brutal question, one that can shatter the ego. But it's necessary. Carl Jung said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And we avoid facing the soul of our relationships. We settle for presence without connection. We give and assume it's being received. We stay and think that our staying matters. But here's the truth. Most people don't see you. They see the comfort you provide, the attention you give, the silence you fill. And when you leave, it's not you they miss. It's the echo of what you gave them. That's the illusion of your presence. You think you're indispensable, but you're not. You think your depth is recognized, but often it's not even noticed. It hurts, doesn't it? To realize that your presence was mistaken for convenience. You were the one who listened, the one who held space, the one who remembered birthdays, checked in when no one else did, offered your heart without condition. But when the silence hits after your departure, they miss the feeling, not the person. That's when it hits you. You were seen as a function, not a being. The friend who always replied, the partner who always forgave, the sibling who always showed up. You weren't loved. You were relied upon. Jung believed that to confront the shadow is to truly begin living. This chapter is that confrontation. You start to notice. When you stop reaching out, the phone stops ringing. When you stop giving, the affection disappears. When you draw a line, they vanish. And it feels like grief, but it's clarity. You're waking up from a dream, the dream that you mattered more than you did. Not because you are unworthy, but because people are often blind to what doesn't scream. Quiet loyalty is rarely applauded. Subtle care is rarely acknowledged. You did it because it was who you are. They received it because it was easy. Let that sink in. You thought you were loved for your soul, but often you were needed for your service. Now ask yourself, if you stopped giving, would they still love you? If you stopped fixing, would they still keep you around? If you simply existed, flawed, tired, without energy to pour, would anyone pour into you? Hard questions, uncomfortable answers, but necessary, because there's power in knowing. Power in pulling away not out of spite, but out of truth. When your presence becomes an expectation, it stops being appreciated. You deserve to be more than someone's emotional convenience. You deserve to be seen, fully, not just for what you do, but for who you are. And if your absence causes silence, not sorrow, let it be a lesson, not a loss. There is no loneliness like being surrounded and unseen. There is no exhaustion like always showing up and never being met. But you're waking up. You're shedding the illusion. You're realizing it's better to walk alone than to exist half-recognized. You can't control who values you, but you can control how long you stay where you're undervalued. It's reclaiming your energy. It's choosing depth over duty. It's walking away not to punish, but to preserve. Preserve your spirit. Preserve your truth. Preserve your presence for those who can feel it, not just use it. Because the illusion of your presence, that ends now. And in its place, a quiet revolution. The beginning of self-respect. You are not a placeholder. You are not a convenience. You are not a function. You are a soul, and you are done pretending to be anything less. Let them wonder why the room feels emptier. Let them sit in the silence you used to fill. Not because you disappeared in anger, but because you finally appeared to yourself. That's not abandonment. That's truth, and it changes everything. Have you ever wondered what people really feel once you disappear? Not what they say, not what they post, not the stories they tell others to make it sound like it was mutual, like it was easy, but what they actually feel when your silence hits them like a wall they didn't see coming. Let me tell you the truth. You are not truly seen when you're around. You're truly seen when you're gone. Because absence is a mirror. It doesn't lie. It reflects everything they tried to ignore about you, about themselves, about the dynamic you shared. And when you walk away without a dramatic exit, without begging, without explaining, that silence screams. Why? Because they expected noise. They expected pleading, closure, something they could interpret as weakness. But when you vanish, they feel a void, and they hate it. At first, they act like they don't notice. They carry on with rehearsed smiles, empty laughter, crowded rooms. But something's missing, something familiar, something they dismissed until it vanished. You, not the version they created in their mind, not the version they tried to mold, but the real you, the presence that held space, the energy that absorbed their chaos, the quiet loyalty they never earned but always expected. That's what they feel, the echo, and the echo is loud. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And that's exactly what your absence forces them to face. Themselves. You were a mirror, and now that it's gone, they have nothing left to reflect their own mess onto. No more distraction, no more scapegoat, just their own unresolved wounds. When you're no longer available, they begin to remember everything you tolerated, every unspoken kindness, every emotional bruise you absorbed without retaliation. At first, they rewrite the past. They convince themselves you were overreacting. They minimize your impact to soothe their guilt. But guilt has a long shelf life, and silence sharpens it. In the quiet, the truth whispers. And the truth is this: you were never the problem. You were the anchor. And now they're adrift. They scroll your old messages. Rewatch the moments they thought they'd always have. Tell themselves they were right to let go. But it doesn't sit well, because deep down they know. They didn't lose someone weak. They lost someone rare. Someone who stayed longer than they should have. Someone who saw their potential when they only showed pain. Someone who believed in them when they didn't believe in themselves. And now they're haunted by your silence. It doesn't shout. It doesn't curse. It just echoes. You see, people don't miss you for what you said. They miss the energy, the calm you brought into their storm, the presence that made them feel understood. And when that presence vanishes, it creates a vacuum. When they try to fill with noise, rebounds, distractions, lies, but none of it works. Because you weren't noise. You were depth. You weren't temporary. You were timeless. And they feel that now. So if you're wondering whether they care now that you're gone, here's the answer. They do, more than they want to admit, but you won't hear it. Because pride speaks louder than regret. And your silence, it reminds them of every chance they didn't take, every word they never said, every wall they never tore down. Let that be their lesson, not your burden. You walking away wasn't weakness. It was clarity. You finally realized you were watering dead soil, giving your light to someone who preferred the dark. And they feel that now. They feel it in moments they can't explain, in the quiet between their laughs, in the stillness after the noise. You linger, and maybe one day they'll admit it. Maybe one day they'll say, I didn't know what I had. But by then, you'll be long gone. Not bitter, not broken, just whole. Because what they feel when you're gone isn't just your absence, it's their own reflection. And that's the most painful truth of all. Let them sit with it, let them feel it, let them grow from it. But don't you dare go back to remind them of your worth. Your silence already said enough. Have you ever noticed what happens when you walk away from someone who took you for granted? First, there's silence. Then comes the rewriting. And somewhere in the middle comes the guilt. But not theirs, yours. Even though you were the one who stayed patient. Even though you were the one who gave, listened, carried. Even though you didn't explode, didn't accuse, didn't blame. Still, somehow, you become the villain in their story. Why? Because guilt is rarely claimed by the one who deserves it. It is projected, thrust onto whoever dares to step out of the dysfunctional script, the mirror they refuse to look into. When you walk away, you hold up a mirror. You show them what they refused to fix. You expose the cracks they painted over. And that is unbearable. So what do? They paint you as the problem. You changed. You gave up. You walked away. Yes, you did. But not because you didn't care. Because you finally realized they didn't. Carl Jung wrote, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. That includes turning you into a scapegoat. Because if they can make you feel guilty, they don't have to feel anything at all. They don't have to grow. They don't have to reflect. They don't have to apologize. And you're left holding the emotional debt they racked up. But let me ask you, why are you paying interest on someone else's irresponsibility? The art of emotional gaslighting. It's subtle, but brutal. You're overreacting. It wasn't that bad. You're so sensitive. And you start to question, was it really that toxic? Was I too demanding? Maybe it was my fault. No, that's not clarity. That's conditioning. People who lack emotional accountability are masters of distortion. And the more self-aware you are, the more likely you are to doubt yourself. Because you hold yourself to a higher standard. But some people use that against you. They weaponize your empathy. And suddenly, you're apologizing for setting a boundary. You're explaining why you needed respect. You're defending your right to peace. That's not love. That's control. The guilt trap. Guilt has a purpose. It can be a moral compass. But when it's misplaced, it becomes a prison. You sit there, rehearsing conversations in your mind, trying to make them understand, trying to end it on good terms, trying to leave with grace. But listen, some exits aren't meant to be applauded. Some goodbyes don't need closure. Some people don't deserve to understand. Because the moment you walked away, they made it clear. They were never trying to hear you. They were just trying to keep you quiet. The illusion of your responsibility. You're not responsible for their healing. You're not responsible for their self-awareness. You're not responsible for the storm they refuse to walk through. Let it go. Let them spin their stories. Let them post the quotes. Let them pretend they were the victim. Because deep down, in the stillness between their thoughts, in the silence before they fall asleep, they know. They know who really showed up. They know who really tried. They know who they pushed too far. And that knowing, that's their guilt to carry, not yours. The rebirth through exit. Leaving is an act of courage, especially when the world tells you to fix, to forgive, to work it out. But not all bridges are meant to be rebuilt. Some are meant to burn, to light your way forward. You didn't walk away to hurt them. You walked away to finally protect you. And in doing so, you broke the cycle. You rejected the narrative. You reclaimed your story. So if you feel guilt creeping in, pause, breathe, and ask, whose guilt is this? Then hand it back, not in anger, not in revenge, but in power. Because your peace? It was never too much to ask for. It was simply too much for them to give. And that's not your failure. That's their truth. Walk on, without guilt, without shame, with clarity, with grace, with your head held high. Let them carry the weight they tried to put on you. And keep going. You're free now. Have you ever noticed how people expect your reaction? They bait you. They provoke you. They test you. Why? Because the moment you react, they own your energy. They control your narrative. They define your identity. Reaction is power surrendered. And silence? Silence is power reclaimed. In a world that runs on noise, silence is rebellion. In a world obsessed with opinion, withholding yours is control. Think of how many times you've let someone pull you into a battle you didn't even want to fight. That one comment on social media, that one passive-aggressive jab, that one false accusation, and suddenly your day is gone, your mood is ruined, your peace is shattered, all because you gave away what was never theirs to take. Your reaction. Carl Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But that only happens when we pause, when we don't lash out, when we let the storm pass without getting soaked in it. When someone insults you and you stay still, you become a mirror. They see themselves, and they squirm, because they weren't looking for the truth. They were looking for a war, and you didn't give them one. You don't owe the world an explanation for your peace. You don't owe strangers access to your nervous system. Non-reaction is not weakness. It's maturity. It's the awareness that your energy is sacred, and not everything deserves a response. Let me be blunt. Most people don't want resolution. They want reaction. They feed on your fire, not your clarity. So stop explaining yourself to the willfully blind. Stop arguing with people committed to misunderstanding you. You don't have to clap back. You don't have to prove them wrong. You just have to keep walking. You know who suffers the most? The one who expected a reaction and got silence. They spin. They overthink. They wonder if you saw the message, the insult, the betrayal. And that wondering, it's louder than any words you could have spoken. Let them wonder. Let them sit in the echo of your absence. Because non-reaction is not the absence of feeling. It's the presence of discipline. Think of every time you lashed out. Every time you snapped back. Did it bring peace? Did it bring understanding? Or did it just multiply chaos? You don't rise by wrestling in the mud. You rise by walking away with your head high. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, said, "You always own the option of having no opinion. You can choose to be unbothered. You can choose not to enter the ring. You can choose stillness. And in that stillness, your real power breathes." This world wants fast emotions, quick drama, instant outrage. But you're not here to be reactive. You're here to be sovereign. That means thinking before speaking. That means breathing before reacting. That means choosing peace over being right. Here's the truth. The more reactive you are, the more controlled you become. But the more silent you are in the face of chaos, the more unpredictable you become. And unpredictability is powerful, because no one can play a game with someone who refuses to play. So next time someone tries to pull you in, smile, pause, walk, not because you're weak, but because you know your worth, and you refuse to waste it on noise. That's not silence. That's strength. That's not avoidance. That's evolution. So stay silent, stay strong, stay sacred, and let your absence speak louder than any scream ever could.